Oh.
Good morning, everybody. We're happy you can join us here live today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Luis Figueroa here with Every Texan. Going to talk a little bit about the American Recovery Plan Act. And today we appreciate you joining us. I am joined by Amy Knop-Narbutis, our Research and Data Director, and Eva DeLuna Castro, our Director for the Invest in Texas team. I wanted to start off with Amy. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of COVID on communities of colors in Texas?
Sure, of course, Luis, and happy to be here with everyone today. As we know, today, this week, and in the past month has been a big release with the U.S. Census Bureau data. So I'm just going to take a moment to go over a few of the things we know from that latest census release, plus things we know from the realities of the past year. Many have been following with great attention the decennial census release about the update of the Texas population. So we know that in 2020, fully 60% of Texans are now people of color. We've added over 2 million Hispanic and Latino Texans, and about 500,000 each for Black and Asian residents since 2010. So that accounts for almost all of our state's growth in the past decade. So really, when we're talking about communities of color in Texas, we're talking about all of Texas, and we're talking about our future. So I just want to emphasize that before I move on to talk about how the COVID-19 pandemic has been devastating to all of us, but we know it hasn't impacted all communities equally. It's exacerbated longstanding inequities. We know that Black and Hispanic Texans were already facing disproportionately negative health outcomes, have suffered the highest coronavirus disease burden and death rates. And also we're coming into the pandemic before with lower average wages, less money to cover shortfalls, less of a financial cushion, which means that Black and Hispanic families have disproportionately felt the economic fallout of the pandemic with additional loss of income, greater than average housing insecurity. And I also want to highlight women and the intersectionality of women of color, particularly who have faced higher rates of unemployment, having to deal with virtual schooling, reduced daycare and after school options, and flexible work schedules, which are just a couple of the disproportionate impacts that we know have affected already struggling households. One of the census data sources we look at frequently is the Household Pulse Survey, which every couple of weeks takes an updated sample of how people are faring. So some recent stats that we have for the state of Texas for just the end of August is that almost 1 in 5 Texas households had lost employment income in the past month, and 1 in 4 Black and Hispanic and multiracial households were affected. So this just shows kind of the importance of continued policy interventions to support households. Another stat that I would highlight is that 1 in 10 Texas families with children report they did not have enough to eat last week. And when you look at that demographically of multiracial families, 1 in 3 did not. That's so many children and families in our states who are struggling still, a year and a half into this to meet basic needs. Also, over half of Texas renters with children reported they lacked confidence in their ability to pay next month's rents. So we know families and communities in Texas are, working hard to make it through this pandemic, and there are essential policy supports that can help them, but many families are still struggling.
Thank you, Amy. I think it's remarkable that we have so much suffering as a result of this pandemic and the policies that have been put in place. And we have a real opportunity with the Recovery Act funds to do something about it. And I got to say, the previous two sessions felt like missed opportunities to address the issues that we're really facing every Texan and communities of color. The third special session starts on September 20th in just a few days. And the governor has added ARPA, the American Recovery Act, to the call following an intense debate during the regular session about federal funding. And this was, culminated in the regular session with a bill related to this funding called HB 2021, where they decided that they would come back to it in a special session. And so here we are approaching the special session. So let me ask you, Eva, can you give us some background on what is ARPA and how much money are we really talking about this special session?
Sure, and I'll try and be brief as far as numbers go. We do have a graphic that will help everybody understand what has already been done to help Texans through the various packages that Congress has passed, and then what exactly are we talking about with this rescue plan aid that goes to state and local governments. The recovery plan did a lot for other services that are provided. But here, what we're looking at on the graph is, first I'll talk just briefly about what has already happened that has helped Texans. Some of these things Amy mentioned, challenges paying for food. We have a lot of SNAP and pandemic EBT benefits coming, like school meals. So there's a lot being done. At the bottom, you see nutrition. Direct payments to families and individuals has been a humongous benefit, not just to the families that received them, but to the economy. Unemployment aid, helping small businesses, all these things have been done through the various packages that Congress has passed since March of 2020. If you look combined at everything that's been done, this is about 10% of the Texas economy. So it's been a humongous, I can't overstate how important this has been in helping Texans. At the top, what we're looking at is the $15.8 billion that Texas will get through the fiscal recovery fund, and it has not yet been allocated. It could have been at least it could have come up with a brief plan when the legislature met in the general session, but it was decided that they would do it later this year, and that's the session that's starting on Monday. Cities and counties also receive aid directly, and some receive it through the state. Most have spent the first year of their $10.5 billion, but a lot of cities and counties are using the second half in their next fiscal year. So we'll be talking in a little while about what can still be done to help you get involved at the local level. Again, your cities and counties are deciding how to use some of this aid. What we heard from Amy is that housing is still a tremendous need. But then we'll also talk a little more about what the state could be doing.
Yeah, it's remarkable to me when looking at that graph how little the state has done. It's largely federal, and so I'm glad that you highlighted that for us from Eva. So let's get into it a little bit. What should the funds be used for? Are there specific restrictions on the funds from the federal government? What was the goal of this, and what is the best use of it?
For both the state and local uses of the fiscal recovery funds, the actual American Rescue Plan spelled out some basic uses, and then we got additional guidance through the summer from the Treasury Department. And basically, it's what a lot of the support from Congress has asked for is deal with pandemic-related healthcare needs. We are still nowhere near out of the woods yet as far as what the pandemic has done to Texans' health and our healthcare system. So that is the single largest thing that we could be doing with it. And also the effect on the economy. So helping families, helping small businesses, helping tourism, travel, restaurants. The healthcare sector itself has been pretty hammered. You might not think so, but just think about all the times last year you couldn't go to the dentist or just see your regular doctor. Another thing that the rescue plan can be used for, again, just the fiscal recovery money, is premium pay for essential workers, and that's both public and private sector workers. So people who still have to go to do their job. A lot of Texans don't have the ability to telecommute. Premium pay to help people who are on the front lines, again, in both the private and public sectors. A third category is investing in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. And here's where we start to hear about like transformational changes. So instead of just responding to the pandemic, we have the opportunity to truly change how our communities can deal with the next challenges that might come along. A lot of what, if you look again at the community level, there are often neighborhoods that have long been neglected, and these have been policy choices of just structural inequalities that exist in access to clean water, water that's not contaminated by lead, broadband access. A lot of kids are having trouble learning because they don't have a really good internet connection. So something that transforms our neighborhoods and makes them better able to recover from the pandemic, and then just to be much more likely in the future to not have to struggle and to be unprepared for any kind of setback like the winter storm. Mm-hmm. So anything that helps families be better prepared, reducing public health disparities. It's perfectly fine to focus money on low-income neighborhoods, and we can use the census data that we heard about. And the assumption is if you're helping people that live in a particular census tract, you can assume that everybody there, if it's a low-income tract, will benefit from this. So you can show that you're targeting the money to where there's the most need. A few things that it can't be used for, or you may have heard about this already, is tax cuts. I mean, technically, there's a little that can be done if you're conforming with federal tax law, but for the most part, this is not supposed to be used just to save the state money in the future. Also, no deposits to local, state or local pension funds for employees or rainy day funds. And one good thing about Texas having waited till now to use any of its $16 billion is that we have indicators from other states. About 34 other states, mostly because of their legislatures, have chosen to use roughly 60% of the money that's available to the states. And there's all kinds of really good ideas there that Texas could follow. Again, housing is definitely something. There's other advocates we've talked to that have plans for that. Environmental related uses that would really, again, just make our neighborhoods cleaner and safer, and also reduce energy uses in the future. So a lot of this, again, transformational is kind of a key theme that we're hearing.
Yeah, about. You often hear the ledge and members say, there's just not enough money for this, or we would love to do all these things, but we just don't have the money. And we hear that excuse, so to speak, every session. And we have a real opportunity here with federal money to make some transformational changes to address some crucial needs, and so we really hope it doesn't get wasted with things that aren't going to help everyday Texans. And so these funds are not just going to the state. We understand that some of the funds are coming to Texas local community, local governments. So Amy, can you tell us a little bit about that process of county and city governments to receive and spend the ARPA funds, generally speaking?
Definitely. Just to jump off what Eva was saying a moment ago, when I shared at the beginning of this presentation some of the disproportionate needs that communities of color in Texas face, like food insecurity, housing insecurity, I should have highlighted that's a factor of systemic racism. It's not the fault of communities. It's the result of intentional public policies, and we need proactive public policies to reverse them. So what I'm about to speak to for cities and counties is to highlight some examples of how cities and counties are using this opportunity and this funding to help close equity gaps and look at this, like Eva said, to have a transformational long-term impact. This isn't like the CARES Act where we're looking at more immediate relief. This is really an opportunity for city and local governments to make a long-term structural change. So in terms of numbers, according to the Texas Comptroller, Texas local governments receive a little bit over $10 billion in fiscal recovery aid. About $1.4 billion of that goes directly to small cities and counties, $3.4 billion to major cities, and $5.7 billion to major counties. And then there are some remaining funds divided between different capital project funds like education, health, human services, et cetera. So local and tribal governments can use the funds to respond to the effects of the pandemic in the way they think best fits the needs of their communities. Because of that, community engagement process for local governments is essential. One of the things that we've highlighted, and we can drop in the chat now, is a community engagement guide, which gives some guidance to local governments about how they can get the community more engaged in figuring out how to spend rescue plan funds. This isn't just like a one-time thing behind closed doors where policymakers should be deciding where they want things to go. This is an opportunity to reach out to the community about what is needed, to engage in proactive outreach and community decision-making for what is ultimately multi-year spending. We may make the decisions this year, but we have through 2024 to allocate, and I think 2026 to spend. So this is really a long-term opportunity. And I'll just highlight a couple examples of great things that we know some cities and counties are doing in Texas. So for example, we know that Harris County early on in the process in April put out a rescue plan equity framework. You can find that on the Harris County Budget Management Department's website. And I think we can drop the link in the chat in a moment, but they really set some proactive goals about how they can advance equity through the rescue plan, like reducing these negative disparities I spoke to earlier and close the gaps. Also an example of the city of Dallas, which has for years been a leader in applying kind of an equity and resilience lens to how they do the city budget, has an equity impact assessment tool that you can find on their website. They're having departments set equity goals, not just for this annual budget period, but in terms of determining how to apply rescue plan funds, which is really great. Other government entities like Bexar County have already figured out 6 buckets where they think it would be really great to spend the money to make an impact. And then they solicit community project proposals from nonprofits and others who are really in touch with community needs in terms of how to spend them. And then some others are already in the point of the process where they feel like we know what the community need is. For example, Travis County, we know this area is one of many that has a housing crisis, and Travis County Commissioner's Court voted earlier this week to allocate $110 million to more affordable housing, which is a great kind of long-term structural change and can really make a big difference for equity based on need.
That's amazing. It sounds like it's really making a difference on the local level, and we'll hope that can continue. So we've talked a little bit about what ARPA is, how the money is being, how much money it is, and what are options that the legislature and local and county governments can do with this funding. But sometimes you hear all these numbers and you hear this data, and you don't really get what can be done with it. So for both Eva and Amy, can you all talk a little bit about why Texans should really care about the rescue plan funding? How does it affect the average Texan, in particular communities of color? What is the real opportunity here for families?
I'll just jump in quickly from a data standpoint. Earlier, I spoke to new census data released earlier this week, which shows, as we spoke about at the federal level, there's been a lot of investment already in relief funds, and the census data released this week just shows what a huge impact it's had nationally on keeping families from falling below the poverty line. So, for example, expanded unemployment insurance, tax credits, economic impact stimulus payments, the expanded child tax credit. According to the impact of all those measures, literally millions and millions of families across the nation have been kept from falling below the poverty line, which without the impact, I think we saw a big impact, a big increase in the official poverty measure and a decrease in median income across the nation. But when we look at measures that incorporate the effects of these policy supports, we show they helped keep many families afloat, but in a position of kind of tenuous balance, right? We know not all communities are doing well still today. Needs continue. We can't say, oh, we did our job last year, now it's time to stop. This is really a time for local and state government to step in and think about more proactive policy interventions that give families and households what they need to survive at this time.
Eva, you want to talk a little bit about the state? Why should people care? What's happening at the under the pink dome, so to speak, when it comes to this funding. Everyone's talking about redistricting, and it's the hot and sexy issue. But I think this is also really important, and in many ways could have more of a direct impact on people's lives. So, do you want to spend a couple of seconds on that?
Sure. And you referred to some of this earlier, but it's important to repeat that a budget, all budgets are moral documents, and it really this is a state that has always told advocates, we wish we could do that. There's not enough money, or now's not the time, or that we might have to do a tax increase to keep that going. So we always hear that there's not enough. And this is a time to let your state senators and your state representatives know that, as always, that you are paying attention. It's hard to pay attention to what the state does, especially this year. But telling them that you know that this money is available and that it could be used for things that really make Texans better off in the long run. And I'll give a few examples of that. One other thing I'll mention also, the reason all Texans should care is because even if you're somebody, a business or a family that's actually done okay throughout the last 18 months, you still, if you're a business, you need customers that can actually come and buy things from you. It's like the Texas economy is so driven by consumption that families that don't have the ability to pay their rent or their mortgage or have their child in a safe childcare placement so that they can go to work. Like the things the rescue plan does for all families help everybody, not just the direct recipients. Another reason for everybody to care is that our own state and local tax system, it just doesn't, it takes the most really from the families that are struggling, and it doesn't necessarily reinvest in them on the spending side of the budget. So families in Texas, we know that they have, as a share of their personal income, a lot more going to state and local taxes. The federal system is a little more progressive. So this is a chance to actually, again, transform our communities and do it in a way that is a little more fair, looking at the revenue side. The other reason to get engaged is because Treasury and the rules and our state and local officials, they should be doing this. $16 billion being spent in 30 days with no public input. That's just not usually how the budget process works.
Right.
State agencies, like the normal budget process, there's a long lead in, there's preliminary hearings, there's a couple of opportunities for public input. The pandemic has made all of that much more difficult. Advocates who were trying to go to the Capitol in the regular session and the special sessions, just all the rules kept changing for what you had to do to be safe and all of that. But we still encourage those of you who think you can go to show up in person. There's chances for electronic comments on House appropriations. A lot of this will move very quickly because special sessions only last 30 days. So we're trying to come up with ways that you can also provide input without having to go through the regular procedures.
Mm-hmm.
So we are at Every Texan are going to be helping people express their opinion on what can be done because we do think it's important. It'll be a little easier to get involved at the local level, honestly, because local governments are required to get their recovery funds in two different portions. The state may end up getting all $16 billion and could allocate it all of that right now instead of waiting on the second half. So that has to do with how our unemployment rate is doing. But if all of that is kind of allocated right now without any reflection of what people are saying is needed, there's some interesting poll results recently that said people really want something done about the grid. Or about cybersecurity. Like there's so many issues that people think are very important, and if this is the chance to do it, both of those things are like one-time kind of cost infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So that would be again a good use of it. The uses of the rescue plan fund don't have to be one time, but that is a way to kind of think about what helps Texas serve communities, serve people and families better from now on. Whether it's access to education, healthcare, nutrition, access to justice. There's like so many different ways that this could be done. And people weighing in, I mean, we always think that the legislature makes better choices when it's hearing and paying attention to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I like to comment cynically sometimes that it's not a hearing if nobody listens. but we're trying to come up with ways that people can identify, what can be done at the state and local level.
Mm-hmm. For those that missed it, the special session will start on September 20th. As Eva pointed out, it'll be 30 days. The bill will go through the normal committee process, the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. So that'll be the first opportunity to weigh in when they have testimony and a hearing, and hopefully they will listen at the hearing. And then, but that, as Eva pointed out, it's not the only way. You can still, call, email, and get your input in various ways. And we're working hard with our team, our comms team, our engagement team, to find ways for people to get involved in this, both at the state and the local level. As Eva pointed out, we have a little bit more time on the local level. It's not as compact as the 30-day special session. But this isn't the first time we've gone through this, right, Eva? You were a leading advocate in the last decade when federal funds came to the state legislature, and there's been a call to say that we should use these funds for one-time expenses, and I think that's partly based on lessons from the past. But can you tell us a little bit about why people are saying one-time expenses, or any other lessons that we may have learned from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act a decade ago?
Sure. It is important to know what happened in 2009 with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and what lessons we should have learned from that, or what we did learn, what we should learn and apply to the rescue plan. Although it is a little different. It's a lot more resources that will be available over a longer period of time. So there are some important distinctions. But one good lesson from the Recovery Act is that when the state budget uses federal money to take the place of general revenue, it's called supplantation. That's the technical term. But when that's how you're using the money, it sounds kind of basic, but you have to remember that that's what you did and have a plan for what happens when that federal aid is no longer there. But what the Texas Legislature did is used billions of dollars from the Recovery Act that were intended to stabilize schools. And after that money was no longer there, in 2011, made $5.3 billion in cuts to the formulas and grants. And as it turned out, that was not necessary. We actually had,
right?
Yeah, we had an economic stabilization fund. I mean, they actually even had money to not make such huge cuts, or to wait and see, like if it gives you some time to see how the economy is going. But going ahead and making that terrible magnitude of cuts to schools, and then a couple other things that happened afterward that we need to remember. Instead of using the recovered revenue, like when revenue actually did recover from the Great Recession, instead of putting that back in and undoing the cuts that were made, 2013 and 2015 sessions had the legislature cutting state taxes. Mm-hmm. So all of that is like, don't use this money for ongoing important parts of the budget, like education, support to school districts, and now the charter schools. Like, don't use this money to make the budget work for a couple of years and then have like convenient amnesia that that's what you did. If we have a rainy day fund, and we do, it's going to have $12 billion in it. That's a good fallback plan to start getting off of like any supplanted uses of general revenue. Mm-hmm. But if you also use it for things that are truly transformational, I mentioned things like improving our access systems for unemployment benefits, or for state eligibility determination systems. It sounds very wonky and boring, but if you have software and computers that can help people, call centers. I mean, the people applying for unemployment benefits, the horror stories of how
those stories, right?
And legislative staff like volunteered to help do that. I mean, just the number of people required to make that system work. If there's a more efficient way Also, if there's ways to make these systems better able to deal with any kind of fraud or any security measures. I mean, there's ways to make your systems more efficient and serve the people that need help efficiently and quickly. So there's one-time things that can be done. There's state buildings that need just remediations and repairs, asbestos, air conditioning systems that would make them safer places to work in. The pandemic has shown us that air and HVAC systems, all of that it does matter that a building is safe to work in when you're trying to deal with public health needs of the workers. Our prisons is another example. It's like there are so many things that could be done to improve the criminal justice facilities, not just to take the place of state revenue. There's also, again, a lot of things from Winter Storm Uri that municipal water and electric utilities maybe could get some help. I haven't mentioned the state doesn't actually have to spend all this money itself. It can re-grant the money to other levels of government. And a lot of other states have actually done that. Other states, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures, have put money into education, access to health care, public health response, housing. Texas is a state that does not really put a lot of its own money into housing. We tend to do things through housing tax credits and things like that. But this is a chance to actually provide the infrastructure, for example, temporary housing or transitional housing, and then from then on, once you have the infrastructure in place, it's just the operational costs that you need to figure out. But I'd say the main lessons from the Recovery Act is let's not have legislators using this money and thinking that the state budget is in much better shape than it really is. We know that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors that are covering up a true deficit. There's so many unmet needs. It's watching can probably think of something they have tried to get the legislature to do that costs maybe $100 million, and they're told, no, we don't have the money for that. So the real needs that exist. And finally, I'd say, like, we're going to hear probably promises of how this could be used to provide quote unquote tax relief. Tell legislators you don't want that. You want the relief of knowing that your kids can go to school and not get COVID, and that teachers can teach in person and not have campuses closing down because the pandemic has started all over again. So that's relief, like economic security and knowing that your children and your parents and everybody is safe and doesn't have to worry about the next variant.
Yeah, tax breaks for the rich or corporations are not going to provide the investments we need for Texan long term. The analogy it comes to mind is, with our houses, and we got to repair and maintain our houses. It costs a little bit of money to do that maintenance now, but it's a lot better to do it when you have this flow of money rather than before when the catastrophe hits and you have to pay a lot more later when you don't have the budget for it. So is that a fair analogy?
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are homeowners can think about things you can do ahead of time that save you money in the long run. In my neighborhood, there's a lot of people getting solar panels, for instance, or if you're an advocate, you know that prevention, that's what you should do. It costs a lot more to have a child in the foster care system, for example, than to actually prevent child abuse and neglect. So again, we have a lot of good examples from what other states are doing. Where we are concerned that the legislature would just be asked to commit the whole $16 billion almost that it's getting without enough of a plan for what happens if the pandemic goes on and the economic recession goes on worse than expected. Also, the shape of the recovery. Some people may have heard about like a K-shaped recovery, where the people at the top are just they're just doing better and better and better. The people at the bottom are becoming worse off. And again, that's just not good, whether it's for the state finances and how we pay for the budget or for our communities, obviously.
So we talk a lot about getting involved. Amy, can you spend a little bit of time just explaining how individual advocates can get involved and make their case for equitable investments, some of the tools that are out there, and how people can jump in?
Great. Would love to. Before I do that, I can't resist sharing another nerdy data point, which we recently put up in a blog on Tuesday, analyzing the census data. To what Eva just said about the K-shaped recovery and people doing better, the census data released nationally this week confirms people who kept their job full-time year-round actually saw an income increase, while fully over half of job losses last year affected people who are making less than $35,000 a year. So just looking about how the nation, states, and the economy recover overall, it's not an equal impact on everybody. We really need to pay attention to what's happening to workers at all parts of the income spectrum. So that's just an essential point I wanted to highlight from Eva. And, so we know how important this is for our communities. Some of the things that I would point you to get more involved if you're a policymaker or speaking to one of your elected officials, we have a American Rescue Plan toolkit for policymakers available on our website at everytexan.org/ARP toolkit. So there's some great materials in there that I referenced earlier, such as community engagement principles for how, for example, local governments can work with their communities to decide how to spend the funds, links to see how other cities and counties and states are spending down the funds, find out more about kind of the budget allocations for Texas and get all those numbers to see how much each government entity is getting, where the money is going. And also we're developing more resources. We would recommend you sign up at our bit.ly/ARP sign up to get more documents. For example, we'll be sharing links to help you reach out directly to lawmakers, record video testimony about why this matters to you and your community. As I've mentioned earlier, is ways to get involved and share your voice, even in a time when it can be difficult to, go to the Capitol directly and register in person. So we're working hard to provide alternate ways for you to share your voice and share exactly how much this matters to you. So definitely visit us on our website.
Yeah, that's great stuff. We have a little bit more time, and we got some questions about other states. Evan, I know you talked a little bit about this in your last answer, but maybe you could expound a little bit. How are other states spending this funds? Are there any states we should be looking at, and are there good models in terms of what other states have done?
I will point people to the National Conference of State Legislatures database for, especially if you're trying to figure out like what cool, good things could be done for a particular area, like foster care or income assistance. I think actually Austin may be trying something that's like a universal guaranteed income kind of plan here at the local level. That's the city of Austin, but states is what you'll see in that database. I mentioned that because it's one of the things that in Texas, it just like something like this just doesn't happen. We don't have assistance for able-bodied adults. But one of the most interesting ones I saw, politically speaking, it was a state that actually gave each member of the Senate and each member of its House of Representatives like a certain amount, like $1 million, to allocate as community grants to their own district. So that was interesting, just because it gives each individual rep and senator a direct decision-making ability. That's not what's going to happen in Texas. What we're going to see here is Chair Bonin introducing a bill that goes through House Appropriations. Senator Nelson will have a proposal in Senate Finance, but something that I'd say if you look through, and in the NCSL database, it's actually pretty usable. It gives you dollar amounts. It gives you details on how it was done. Like there's actually links to the legislation itself. So you can see how states decided, for example, to use funding for, I'll try and give specifics if people are really interested, but if you know what you want to do and how it can be done, that gives you all the details. Education, I'll mention that because a lot of people think that school districts in Texas have already gotten billions of dollars from the ESSER funds, education stabilization funds. That doesn't mean they don't need more resources to deal with school, making schools safe, and with teacher staffing levels. There's just so many things that are not going as well as was expected. addressing what's happening to students that aren't learning as well at home, or the hybrid systems. Like, there's just still so many things that can be done for schools that a lot of states have chosen to do that, or they've chosen to put more resources into the schools that need it the most. So if the rescue plan or the other ways that ESSER funds have flowed out gives every school district a certain amount per student, that doesn't take into account that there's equity issues, that maybe some school districts need a lot more targeted help. Mm-hmm. So some states have done that, like put extra resources where they're most needed.
Mm-hmm. We have a little bit more time. I'm going to ask Eva one more, and then we can maybe do some closing thoughts. Eva, we the Lieutenant Governor and the Senate have started putting out bills already for the special session. One that we saw from last special was SB 91. I think it's now SB 1. It seems to do exactly what we suggest is a dangerous policy, maybe a repeat of the mistakes of the past. Concerns about Senate Bill 1 and the property, and the tax cuts that are being proposed there?
Yeah, that is a legitimate concern. Senate Bill 91 flew through the second call session. I think it was heard on a Monday in Senate Finance, like the last week of the session, and passed the full Senate the next day. And the premise of this proposal is that the state has surplus general revenue that should be returned to the taxpayers, and it really, there is no surplus there, and we wouldn't be returning the money to the people who paid the revenue in the first place. So there's just so many things wrong with the premise, but the main problem is Senate Bill 91 was being proposed at a time when the legislature hadn't yet launched this humongous increase in border spending. And also had a supplemental bill that restored funding for legislative branch of state government and other costs, TRS, the 13th check. So there's so many costs that hadn't even been paid for when Senator Betancourt was saying that we had a surplus. So first, we've already used some of the money the controller said was available. Second, these proposals don't come up with a way to pay for schools in the long run. Mm-hmm. So a one-time temporary proposal, it's being described as like, well, we would only do this in a year that we had extra money. Mm-hmm. And then the next year, school tax rates will go back to what they were before this proposal was enacted. I just don't see that happening in real life, that legislators are going to be willing to raise school taxes all of a sudden after a year in which they lowered them by $2 to $4 billion. It just seems politically very difficult to do that. But what we would be doing is recreating the problem when we use Recovery and Reinvestment Act. We use federal money to do something that was a state commitment. So if the special session sees the legislature using state dollars to free up general revenue, we saw a lot of this actually in the CARES Act. Texas got $8 billion under the CARES Act, used about half of it just to pay for the prison system, the juvenile justice facilities, like public safety employees, their salaries and their benefits. A lot of it was used in good ways to actually have surge operations, to have public health workers deployed to our communities. But some of the money, at least $4 billion, just took the place of general revenue. We are concerned that that'll happen again in this special session, and it'll be done in a way that helps the legislature think that we have, again, just extra money. And we know that's not the case. So if we don't come up with a way to pay for schools, House Bill 3 in the 2019 session put a lot more state funding into the formulas. It basically renewed the state's commitment to our public schools. It didn't come up with a long-term way to pay for all that tax compression. And we have sources on our website that tell people a little more about what's wrong with this. Our colleague Chandra Villanueva basically explained it very well. She's like, you're putting tax cuts before kids, and it's just a very dangerous thing to do. If schools had already been as dependent on sales taxes as everything else was during this pandemic, that there would just be such huge shortfalls in our school district and state budgets for schools, that it would not have been able to be solved with federal funds. So putting schools on and our other colleague Dick Levine talks about taxes being a three-legged stool. In other states, there's income taxes, sales taxes, and property taxes. Texas already has just the two-legged stool: local property taxes and state, mostly consumption taxes. Bills like Senate Bill 1 that just make more and more and more of public school budgets dependent on mostly state sales taxes. It's not exaggerating to say it just puts them on a pogo stick. The next recession, and we're not even out of this one, the next one will just make it that much more difficult to keep school children and teachers in classrooms that are manageable and in which they can learn. So there's some reasons not to like it, but at least for now, it's not on the call. Yeah. But some of the ways that this money could be used could make it possible. So that's the concern there.
Yeah, make that personal. You know, I have a 6-year-old in public schools, 25 students in the classroom. Air conditioner didn't work for the first 3 weeks of school. You know, they were this poor teacher was trying to teach all these first graders in an oversized, you know, in an overpopulated classroom with, you know, and without air conditioning. The room was constantly around 85, 88 degrees. And then to tell us that, you know, schools are doing fine, they don't need the funds. It's just not a reality I think most parents believe in or can relate to. So just to take that to the personal level, I appreciate that, Eva. Let's go ahead and wrap it up, and then and then we can talk a little bit about what's moving forward. Amy, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would just summarize from all of this discussion. I think the main takeaways for me is this is really an opportunity to invest in a long-term transformational manner. This isn't just a one-time ad hoc spending that should be done behind closed doors. It's really important that we as communities get involved and we share what we need, and most especially having an equity impact analysis about how the funds are spent. You know, I shared a lot of national level, Texas level stats about how people are doing, but we know every individual's experience is different. And if we don't look at how funds are closing gaps, particularly undoing the systemic racism of past policies, we're missing a huge opportunity to make Texas better for the future. So just emphasize, like, we need to think about this strategically, and we need to get involved and share what we want to be done with these funds.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Amy. Anything, Eva, you want to end on?
I think we've said a lot about how important it is to get engaged. We'll be providing ways that people can do that, but I think if it's just not really your community that is the main concern for you, but your own family and how you're doing, what you said, Luis, about what happened to your child's classroom, it's like, you might hear during the session that you'll get a property tax cut that gets you $100. It's like, wouldn't you rather have your child be in a decent classroom than have $100? I mean, even if all you care about is yourself, this is not a best use of this money, and it'll end up costing you more in the long run. So, just kind of think about what's being proposed, and if it doesn't help all Texans, especially those who are not yet recovered, this is the time to do much better for Texans. And if we don't do this now, then when will we do it? So
thank you both for doing this, and thank you to our behind the scenes team that we're on the Facebook live. You know, we have Danny Guerrero and Katie Martin Lightfoot, who were really instrumental in putting this together, and all the folks at our communications and development teams to help put this together. I will remind people of the timeline. The special session starts again on the 20th and will be 30 days. And we will be engaging you in a variety of ways. We'll have Facebook Lives, we'll have signups, we'll have ways to get more involved. But another way to get involved and to support our work is to support our legacy event. As you've heard today, our work centers around equitable and data-driven policy solutions. Every Texan, formerly CPPP, our history and values are firmly rooted in social justice. And with this year, we are honored to present the president of the Ford Foundation, Darren Walker, with our Legacy Award. We're going to have a great event this year with Darren Walker. He has taken exemplary steps to strengthen the philanthropic sector's response to rising inequities and systemic injustice in Texas, the United States, and really the whole world. So we hope you'll join us this Monday, same time as the session starting on Monday, September 20th at 1 p.m., as we'll host a virtual ceremony honoring Mr. Walker. And you can head to our Facebook event to RSVP for this occasion. It'll be featuring a conversation with former Secretary of HUD, Henry, and former Mayor of San Antonio, Henry Cisneros, and Mr. Walker on Texas public policy and how philanthropy can advance social justice. So we hope to see you there. We hope you can get engaged this session. And thank you so much for joining us here at Every Texan. We are a resource for you, and we appreciate your time today. Have a good rest of your day.